morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be joining us from around the world. My name is Hamdi, and together with my co-program manager, Quynh, we welcome you to the inaugural Hypertension Winter School, an initiative of the High Blood Pressure Council of Australia. We thank you all for joining us for a jam-packed program over the next few days. Before we get started, I want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Some housekeeping. Please remain muted during presentations. There will be opportunities to speak during the question times to ask speakers questions. Please refer to page 3 of the program booklet for full Zoom etiquette. These presentations are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please turn off your videos when asking questions. We also ask that you turn off your videos now to reduce bandwidth for everyone. If you would like to tweet about the event, we ask that you use the official hashtag HBPRCA_WS2020, which will be posted in the chat. I would now like to call on Markus Schlaich, the President of the High Blood Pressure Council of Australia, to give us a few words.
Hamdi, thank you so much for the introduction, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you across the globe to this inaugural High Blood Pressure Research Council 2020 Winter School. We were absolutely thrilled to see so many registrants, not only from Australia, but from, again, countries across the globe, and that really tells us that there's an appetite out there for these types of events. And in the current difficult COVID-19 situation, obviously this is the way to go. But it's wonderful, to see you all there online. We thought it's a great opportunity to engage with the scientific and clinical community, taking care of what we consider the biggest killer worldwide, which is hypertension. And the idea for this High Blood Pressure Research Council Winter School originated actually in Thailand last year, when Rachel Kleine and Dinh were supported by the High Blood Pressure Research Council to join the International Society of Hypertension summer school at the time. And I remember we sat together on the river having balmy night and some drinks, and thought that this would be an excellent format to educate and bring together people who are interested in hypertension, its pathophysiology, and its management and treatment. So here we are. I think we have a fantastic program with wonderful speakers, very important and practical topics. And I really would like to thank the Early and Mid-Career Research Committee, in particular Hamdi and Quynh, Dinh, and Revathy, for organizing this, and everybody else on the council who was involved. I'm sure we'll have a fantastic day. Please engage and think about joining the High Blood Pressure Research Council, which is really the place to be. So a warm welcome again. Look forward to a fantastic program. And I would like to hand over to my colleague Martin Schultz, who's in charge of the membership, and he will say a few words as well.
Thank you, Markus. I'm just going to share my screen, if possible, but I'm unable to do that currently. But I just wanted to, again, welcome everybody on behalf of the council to this winter school. And we certainly are very thrilled, as Markus mentioned, to have everybody join us from all over the world. And if you're not currently a member of the council, we definitely welcome applications for membership. It is free for students, and I've got, if you visit our website, I'm unable to share my screen at the moment to show you that link, but I can do that now actually. I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. Essentially, it is, as I said, free for students to join, and there's a number of benefits for those who do join. And they include reduced fees at our annual scientific meeting, which Brad will talk about in just a moment, as well as the eligibility for awards and prizes at that annual scientific meeting, including some exchange trips to the British and Irish Hypertension Society or the American Heart Association hypertension meetings for students and early to mid-career researchers, research exchange grants, again for early mid-career researchers and students, some transition grants, which are really great opportunities to enable those that are going through some difficulties or emerging from PhD studies through into postdoctoral work. We have a strong mentorship program where we're paired with other members of the council, which is a really great initiative, and I thoroughly recommend everybody getting involved with that if you are currently a member and not actually taking part in that. Membership includes access to online educational resources, regular newsletters, as well as a number of other initiatives that the council runs, such as the winter and summer school here, online catch-ups and access to attending other events such as Science Meets Parliament. But the most important thing is, as Markus mentioned, is it's a really highly productive and engaged network of internationally recognised colleagues in the field of blood pressure and hypertension research. So given that it's free for students, I certainly encourage everybody to visit this website and think about joining today. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Brad Broughton now, who is going to talk a little bit more about our annual scientific meeting.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I too, like Martin, hopefully I should be able to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that now. So as co-program manager with Francine Marquez, we're delighted to announce the first ever high blood pressure virtual scientific meeting, which offers lots of opportunities, particularly for students and ECRs, to present some of their latest research. So the council is really excited to be able to deliver a condensed but an impactful version of the meeting program via our new online platform. So the meeting will take place on the 3rd and 4th of December. So please take note that the abstract due date is the 6th of October, and that you can upload your abstracts via the following link, where you can also find out some more information. But I just also wanted to highlight some of the key reasons why we think attending this meeting will be highly worthwhile, particularly for students and ECRs. So as Martin has already indicated, the registration costs are extremely affordable, particularly for this virtual meeting. Whilst it will be shorter than the previous annual scientific meetings, the registration is much lower. I'm sure many of you who have attended previous meetings can see here on the screen that for an ordinary member, early bird costs is well down. We've actually been able to come in at $150, which is extremely affordable, and for student members at $75. So the program will also be jam-packed with high-quality talks. So this includes 5 invited speakers who are internationally recognised within their fields, and there's also 4 student and 4 ECR award presentations as well. Now, for those students whose abstracts aren't selected for a talk, there will be opportunities to present your work via an e-poster, which is a 5-minute interactive poster presentation. And of course, there'll be many opportunities for these highly desirable awards that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with High Blood Pressure Research Council of Australia. And these include our ECR and student oral prize winners presenting at the British and Irish Hypertension Society or the American Heart Association High Blood Pressure Research meetings. And Quinn's going to talk about those in a moment, about what a fantastic opportunity this is for those awardees. We'll also have some cash prizes for e-poster winners, as well as a number of other prestigious awards, such as the Paul Corner Senior Scientist Award, J. Chin Dusting Mid-Career Scientist, and the Judy Whitworth Women in High Blood Pressure Research Award. So we look forward to seeing many of you at the meeting in December, and I'll now hand it over to Quynh.
Thanks, Brad. if you could just stop sharing your screen for a moment.
Yeah. I just need to click off sharing, is that correct?
Yeah.
Can't seem to do that.
Thanks, Brad.
Sorry, thanks.
No worries. So hi everyone, my name is Quynh, and as Hamdi mentioned, I'm also one of the program managers for the Hypertension Winter School. And as Brad mentioned, I'm honoured to be one of the student and ECR awardees for the annual scientific meeting. So I'm just going to share my screen now to talk about some of the amazing experiences I've had with these awards. So these awards gave me the opportunity to attend the AHA Hypertension Scientific Meeting in 2017, and also the British and Irish Hypertension Society meeting in 2019 as an invited speaker, as you can see here. So, you know, conferences are great for networking. So I was invited to attend the executive dinner at the British and Irish Hypertension Society meeting. I also met a lot of other hypertension researchers, which I've still kept in contact with until today. These awards also ask you to attend a lab visit overseas. And so this is one of the lab visits I did at the Ohio Northern University, and they invited me to do a departmental seminar. So this is a great opportunity for you to get feedback on your work and potentially form international collaborations and meet new people if you're interested in doing an overseas postdoc. Lastly, it's a good chance for you just to take a break and travel, and I took the opportunity to meet with one of my PhD supervisors and his family in the US. So I highly encourage all students and ECRs to join the High Blood Pressure Research Council of Australia and to participate in the annual scientific meeting. I'll now move on to the program for the Hypertension Winter School. So for over the next 2 days, we'll have many insightful presentations from some of Australia's leading hypertension researchers and clinicians. We'll also have presentations from some of the rising stars of the council in the student and ECR Blitz presentations. There'll also be opportunities to network on day 2. I'll now introduce the chair for the first session, Dr. Dean Piccone from the Menzies Institute of Medical Research. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Hamdi. Thanks, Quynh. I think we should just get straight into it now. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Erin Howden from the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute to give the first talk. Would you like to share your screen, Erin? There we go. So Erin's going to be talking about the physiology of cardiovascular control. Over to you.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, thanks so much for the invitation to present today. I'm really honoured to be part of the Winter School program and to be speaking to you today on the physiology of cardiovascular control. Although I must say that I feel that this is potentially a topic that could be covered in its own several talks, or at least over the course of a couple of days. And if you find any of what I'm going to talk about today particularly interesting, then I would suggest investing in this textbook that I've read a couple of times during my postdoc from Loring Rao, and it really goes into a lot of these seminal studies that have provided the foundational understanding of cardiovascular regulation, especially in regards to human physiology. And I'd also just point you to the work from my postdoc mentor, Professor Benjamin Levine. I was fortunate to spend 4 years in Ben's lab in Texas, and he's really a leader in cardiovascular physiology and regulation. And his work is, underpins a lot of what I'm going to speak about today. So with that being said, I feel like there's a lot to cover, so I will get into it. I'm just going to provide a bit of an overview on cardiovascular regulation, and I know that other speakers over the next couple of days are going to go into different aspects of this in more detail. I'll talk about some of the sort of high level controls, and then also how we use cardiovascular regulation in our research, and how we use it to understand and identify patients at risk. So the main goal of cardiovascular regulation is to maintain blood supply throughout the body. And it's really quite astounding that we are able to ambulate, stand upright, and do all the things that we probably take quite for granted throughout the day, because the system is working under a really huge amount of, or huge variation in pressure. And it has to be able to withstand challenges to homeostasis throughout the day. And these can include changes in due to orthostasis, to changes in gravity, in response to exercise or activity of daily living. We're also challenging the system thermally with changes in the environment. If you're in Melbourne at the moment, it's very cold, so our cardiovascular system is having to deal with that. If you go to altitude, and the greatest challenge to the system is if we are unfortunate to experience a hemorrhage. And in response to each of these perturbations, there's a very coordinated and systemic response, integrated response that seeks to maintain blood supply and arterial pressure, especially to the heart and brain, depending on the level of the challenge. So how is blood flow maintained through the body? Well, it occurs when there is a pressure difference. And so as flow moves through a vessel, there is a change and pressure is reduced. And for a given flow, you can see that there is this equation below here that represents, I cannot pronounce Poisson's law properly, but for those French people in the audience, I do apologise. But what I would just highlight here is really the impact that the cross-sectional area or the radius of the vessel has on the overall flow, so that we see as a change in vessel diameter occurs, we get a drop in pressure but an increase in velocity. So as pressure changes or reduces through as we move into the smaller arteries and the arterioles and capillaries, we would see an inverse relationship with an increase in pressure to aid flow through those highly resistant vessels. Now, unsurprisingly, the heart is also a key part of this, and I'm sure we're all well familiar with how the heart is arranged. It sits in our thoracic cavity, and there's 4 chambers, which again operate under a pressure system, so that blood is moved from high to low to high pressure, and is able to flow through this organ and maintain perfusion in the body. And if you can see my little MRI image on the right there, it's really quite, incredible how the coordinated contraction occurs between the right and left ventricle. And the physiology regulating this in itself is, I think, an entire talk on its own. So I'm just going to talk very broadly today how the heart is able to maintain and generate blood flow and sustain blood pressure. And there's 2 main equations that I hope that you'll remember from today, and that is that our cardiac output, so the amount of blood that's ejected with each heartbeat, is the function of both the stroke volume and the heart rate, and these 2 and these are regulated differently within the cardiovascular system. The cardiac output contributes as well to maintaining arterial pressure, and as does the total peripheral resistance. From a assessing cardiovascular function standpoint, we can look at, we use these cardiac pressure volume curves to understand how cardiac function is affected, and we can look at the regulation via these relationships. So here on the left, we have a left ventricular end diastolic volume pressure curve, which allows us to assess the compliance of the heart. So we can look at how the change in cardiac size or cardiac volume through the cardiac cycle impacts for a given filling pressure. And in an individual with a smaller or stiffer heart, such as someone with hypertension or hypertrophy, we'd expect that this curve would be shifted up and towards the left. If someone had a larger, more compliant heart, like an athlete, for example, the curve becomes quite flat and in some cases will be shifted to the right. So for a given filling pressure, these individuals will be able to generate a much greater stroke volume. Similarly, if we look at the Frank-Starling relationship, this is another really classic way of assessing cardiac function. You can see that changes in contractility for a given, in this figure, end diastolic volume, which is a surrogate of preload or filling pressures into the heart. We see changes in the amount of blood that can be ejected. So if we have a decrease in contractility for a given filling pressure, we're not able to generate the same amount of cardiac output. So in addition to those factors, afterload is also impacts the amount of blood that can be ejected from the heart. So an increase in afterload will reduce stroke volume. So afterload could be thought of as the wall stress that the heart has to overcome to eject blood, and it's often can be approximated to arterial pressure. Whereas inotropy or contractility is the force of the myocardial contraction, and this is also impacted or regulated by both your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and the circulating levels of catecholamines. And these factors both can cause an increase in contractility or a decrease in contractility and change stroke volume via these ways. So there's multiple ways in which the heart is being regulated to maintain cardiac output with each heartbeat. The autonomic nervous system is also very important in maintaining the beat-by-beat control of our cardiovascular system, and the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system innervate both the heart and the vasculature, although the vasculature is more so innervated by the sympathetic nerves. And on a beat-by-beat basis, this system is able to provide regulation, through integrating signals within the baroreceptors. So the baroreceptors are found in the aortic and carotid arches, and basically these are small stretch receptors that detect the amount of vessel stretch with each heartbeat, and integrate this information into the brainstem. From there, the system is then applies either the parasympathetic or sympathetic, or modulates either parasympathetic or sympathetic tone, depending on whether heart rate or blood pressure how heart rate and blood pressure need to be modulated. So it's a very complicated system, but it's operating on a beat-by-beat basis to make these adjustments to maintain our homeostasis in response to any of these stresses that we talked about earlier. In addition to these short-term or more dynamic regulators, there is a long-term cardiovascular regulators, which I'll talk more about later, but today I'm going to focus more on these aspects. So in the lab, we can use several different stresses to understand cardiovascular regulation. And during my time in Texas, I was really lucky to get exposure to using many of these different stresses to understand cardiovascular regulation. So we did studies in where we looked at postural changes, and I did a lot of work in this area. We can manipulate filling pressures to simulate gravity with lower body negative pressure. We also did studies where we removed gravity for NASA and put patients on parabolic flights and looked at cardiovascular regulation in response to no gravity. We manipulated the temperature in temperature chambers, and hyperbaric chambers were used also to look at altitude and hypoxia. But the main sort of focus of the work that I did was really looking at cardiovascular regulation during exercise and the effect of exercise on cardiovascular regulation. So in the lab, Ben, who's in this, here in this picture, he developed a method for examining cardiac function. And what you can see here is one of our research participants, although this was a few years before I arrived in Dallas. Although the setup is still the same today. We measure cardiac volumes with 3D echo. We measure cardiac filling pressures via pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. So we do a right heart catheter, and there is we're measuring filling pressures in the pulmonary artery there. And what we do is we manipulate the cardiac filling pressures with lower body negative pressure to 2 different levels. And we also do, a saline infusion that allows us to increase filling pressures. So from all these measurements, we're able to create a left ventricular filling pressure curve, which I showed you earlier on. And we've done several studies using this approach and kind of used it to understand the aging effects, as well as other in different disease states. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we see with aging today. So this is that diastolic pressure volume curve that I mentioned earlier. So here we have 4 groups with individuals who are young, middle-aged, late middle-age, and older. And we can see that with increasing age, that the heart becomes less compliant and stiffer. And so we have the youngest group here where the curve is quite flat, and as we age, we see that the curve shifts across and becomes smaller and stiffer. Similarly, when we look at the Frank-Starling mechanism, we see that stroke volume is also impaired, so contractility is impaired with aging, so that the older individuals, we see that the curves are shifted down. I went on to look at how exercise training affected this. So we had shown that aging was associated with the heart becoming smaller and stiffer. What about, could we exercise someone and overcome these effects? So what we did was we trained people for 2 years. They'd been previously sedentary, and just really quickly, we showed that with 2 years of exercise training, we were able to increase cardiac volume and increase cardiac compliance with the curve shifting to the right. We saw similar benefits when we looked at the Starling mechanism, which shifted up as well, suggesting that, again, that contractility was improved. So I was also really interested in understanding whether sex modified the cardiovascular adaptations to endurance training, where over the last sort of 5 or 10 years, we've really begun to understand the importance of sex in understanding cardiovascular regulation. And we see that different chronic disease states manifest diseases differently. Women and men respond differently to medication, and also to different, and are also should be managed differently. So we looked at whether there was a difference in a training response. We took sedentary individuals and trained them over a year to run a marathon. And this is just showing that the training volume was similar between men and women. And we were really surprised to observe that there was a really divergent response in training. So this is exercise capacity, aerobic exercise capacity, and you see that women are have lower fitness than men at the beginning of the study, but really the response is very different. And we see that men continue to increase fitness, whereas women, that this response is blunted here. And when we look at how the heart is adapting to the exercise as well, the LV mass increases also sort of suggested that women did not respond in the same way. We went on to investigate this.
Excuse me, sorry, Erin. Is it okay to just wrap up in the next minute or so?
I'll just finish this. I can finish now if you like, or
just in the next minute or so would be great.
Sorry. So we also went on to try and understand the acute response to exercise and whether this might explain this divergent response. And we used again a right heart catheter and measured the filling pressure response to exercise. And just quickly, what we observed was that filling pressure responses were different between men and women, but it was mainly at the higher levels of exercise that we observed that filling pressures increased to a greater extent in females. And we think that this might help explain the results that we saw in the endurance training study, where by over a long term, the adaptations were impaired by this increase in pressures, because what it tends to suggest is that pericardial constraint is restraining the ability of the heart in females to further adapt to the endurance training. So I will just quickly say that we're using this sort of approach to try and understand cardiac physiology at the Baker now, to identify at-risk individuals by studying the cardiac response to exercise. And we're using this in a number of cancer patients, and I would love to tell you more about it, but I've obviously gone over time. So I will stop there, and if there are any questions, sorry.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Erin. Fantastic presentation. So we've got a couple questions coming through the chat, and people can also raise their hand if they like by using the raise hand function. So we might just do a couple quick questions. So from Lynn, does it need 2 years of exercise to see improvement? So I think that was when you, I think it was when you had the heart failure study up.
Yeah. So it depends, I think, a little bit on the population, but in this study, we'd done prior work where we'd exercise people for a year and again, exercise them quite hard, but not being able to show that cardiac compliance change. So we can see changes in fitness and other markers of cardiovascular health in a much shorter time frame, but to get these changes to intrinsic cardiac function, I think it does need to be really prolonged exercise and at quite a high intensity as well.
Great, thanks. So another question from Eric Lee. Do types of exercise matter, aerobic versus resistance?
For cardiovascular adaptations, absolutely. So we really designed our exercise interventions to try and maximise the cardiovascular adaptations, and there's a lot of discussion about what is the most effective type of endurance training or aerobic exercise training to do, and our sort of approach was to use a combination of moderate intensity exercise, high intensity intervals, threshold work, which is really uncomfortable exercise where you're sort of at just below your anaerobic threshold for 30 or so minutes if you can sustain it. And then we also did a long 60-minute aerobic session, and we supplemented this with resistance training, but I really think the resistance training was the complementary aspect of our intervention. But so for cardiovascular adaptations, that's what I would suggest.
Okay, great. Well, I think in the interest of time there, we might move along. So many thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you.